you see way up in the sky? Making circles in the morning sun, flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why I can't break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
How about now? That looks better. There we go. No, it's not Pro Streamer. It's that Fix decided that he was going to update his preamp software, and it threw everything for a loop. And that's the one thing I didn't test. So there we go. Welcome to 1.43 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History, as we peaking real bad.
My lord?
Peaking real bad. Well, let's turn that down. How about now? Am I still peaking really badly? We should be turning this down and talking into the mic. It looks like it's better. Test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. There we go. Much better. Alrighty. Yep. As I said, new update for the preamp software, and things got thrown off into left field. Thanks for calling it out. So for the third tries a charm here, welcome to 1.43, episode 1.43 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History. We are in the home stretch of the French Revolution. But before we get to that tonight, Berlin, thank you for the resub, 20 months at Tier 2. That helps me pay for the maps that you're going to see tonight. Rocket, 24 months at Tier 1. Dustin, 24 months at Tier 1. Thank you both very much. So, last week, we basically took France and put it to the side and left France with Napoleon. We picked him up from his Malta takeover into Alexandria and then followed him all the way into 1799, which is right before he's going to take over in France, basically. But before he does that, he's going to come home and kind of save France. So we have to spend this episode talking about why did France need saved? What was going on in France while he was there? And how did the situation deteriorate so badly that France basically had to stand back up and go back to war? Now, we've talked about the first coalition going back to 1792, when Jacques Hébert stood up in the Legislative Assembly and started to saber rattle and get all of continental Europe and Britain upset with France, and how that war went on and then ended. Kinda, with Britain still being the only belligerent, and how that's not true anymore, as the Ottoman Empire, as we know last week, has already declared war on France. Like I said, this week we're going to double back and follow all of those events now in continental Europe, which doesn't really include the Ottoman Empire, but they're going to get mixed in here as well. that basically were going down while Napoleon was trapped, while Napoleon didn't have correspondence coming from the continent because the British were blockading him after the Battle of the Nile, and kind of give you an idea of everything that transpired while he got those dispatches in his hand that prompted him to come home. Now, we're going to find out here that the reason that things kind of went bad in Europe is because Napoleon was in the East. Everyone is about to form another new anti-French coalition, dubbed by history to be the Second Coalition, and the reason a lot of these belligerents felt emboldened is because the guy who had been dominant wasn't there for France. Especially the Austrians. The Austrians really had only been beaten by Napoleon. They had traded back and forth with the other generals on the Rhine, but they didn't have an answer for Napoleon, and he's not there. So they felt much more arrogantly opposed to peace now that he was gone. It also turns out that the Directory's desire to get Napoleon either out of France, to crash and burn, or win triumphantly, so long as he was far away from them, was not the win-win scenario that they thought it was going to be for them. And it actually is going to probably be the critical decision that leads to their demise later in 1799. Emboldened, that's a good word. Arrogantly emboldened. So to start this tonight, we have to wind the clock back all the way to the fall of 1797. Now this is before Lazar Hoche died, and before Napoleon was even selected to lead an expedition, somewhere, because originally it was going to be Great Britain and then it became Egypt. But the Directory at this point in time, the fall of 1797, a solid 6 months before Napoleon really is getting anything in order to go to Egypt, they were feeling pretty good about themselves. They had the Treaty of Campo Formio in front of them, which was the idea that Austria, which was the big bad guy to them at the time, was kind of done fighting. And then they had the coup of Fructidor happening around the same time, which purged all of the closet... Well, actually, no, the coup of Fructidor occurred earlier, but it had purged all the closet royalists and, frankly, anyone who was in favor of a generous peace so that maybe we can restore a monarchy. So the Directory was feeling pretty aggressive as we roll into 1798, because all of the Republicans, remember, really wanted to take it to the losers. They wanted to get as much as they could and kind of punish the people who had stood against Republican France. You remember from episode 1.41, 2 weeks ago, that the French negotiators at the Second Congress of Rastatt were pretty much trying to dictate terms to get an even better deal for themselves than what had been negotiated at the Leoben preliminaries. And then on top of all of this, the deal that Bonaparte kind of made at Campo Formio was actually pretty unpopular in the post-Fructidor halls of the Directory, because it was really a decent deal apart from you can have Venice if we can have the stuff along the west bank of the Rhine. It really was a decent deal for the Austrians. So nobody in power in France wanted a decent deal for the Austrians. So the talks at Rastatt that were there to pretty much mop up the rest of all of the pieces of the Holy Roman Empire had ground to a halt, as the French sat there with Napoleon no longer present and just tried to pound further concessions from all of the members of the German Confederation, the Confederation of the Rhine, all those smaller elector states of the Holy Roman Empire. So France is at the Second Congress of Rastatt being pretty arrogant. We talked about how it really wasn't going anywhere 2 episodes ago. But it wasn't just French hubris that was stalling things at Rastatt. You have to remember that the Holy Roman Empire is more than just Austria, and there are like 2,000 component parts to the Holy Roman Empire, and they all had someone there, present, no matter how small their little patch of land was. They were there trying to work the Congress of Rastatt to their advantage. And the group that was particularly working the Congress was those secular princes who had lost their lands on the west side of the Rhine. They wanted compensated with lands on the east side of the Rhine. And they were eyeballing various ecclesiastic principalities, church lands, to be compensated with. They were saying, okay, well, you can have our little principate over there, but the church has to give us land on the other side of the river because we're princes. We have to have a place. It's that noble blue blood arrogance that they thought they meant anything realistically in the grand scheme, that their bloodlines and heraldry and all that stuff that France has gotten rid of entitled them to something, even though they had basically been just ran past back and forth over and over and over by both the French and Austrian armies repetitively over the past 6 years. Because these these German princes, these Rhine princes, wanted to get something in return for having given up their land to the French for peace, they actually now saw France as their diplomatic ally at the Congress, the Second Congress of Rastatt. Because they knew, based on how the French Revolution had gone, that the French would love to strip the church of land on the east side of the Rhine, because that's what France has been doing to everybody. They have been going into Belgium and their own country. Shame on you, Turi.
Shame.
I'm talking
Shame.
here, and people are trying to steal from each other. Shame on you. But the French had spent the revolution grabbing church land and doing what they wanted with it. So all of these Rhine princes who wanted church land on the East Bank now, or eastern into the German Confederation, they were like, hey, France will probably back us up on this. They'll probably recognize that we deserve to be compensated and fully support more taking of property from the church. So these princes were also pretty annoyed at the Habsburgs, that is the Habsburg monarchy of Austria, which had held the empire, the emperorship of the Holy Roman Empire for hundreds of years. But they realized they're anti-monarchy, right? I mean, you have to play the angle, and sure, they're anti-monarchy, but these guys weren't so much the monarch, right? They were nobles for sure, but they weren't really running anything big. So I think they were rolling their dice and saying, the Holy Roman Empire, who still technically takes orders from the Pope to a degree, is much less likely to give up church land than is the French ability to pressure them into doing so. And that's kind of why they kind of sided with the French at the Second Congress of Rastatt. But the princes were also pretty upset with the Habsburgs in general. The head, the monarchy of Austria, they'd held the Holy Roman Empire ship for hundreds of years, minus one blip, because the Habsburgs didn't fight very hard in their mind to protect the left bank properties on the Rhine, those western properties. So it's arrogant to a degree to say, you didn't fight hard enough on our behalf. Here we are, these tiny, teeny, tiny elector states that maybe 100 years ago, our cavalry and our infantry mattered in the grand scheme, but warfare has evolved past that now. And they're stamping their foot on the same idea of privilege that has been central to what we've discussed since way back in episode 1.1. They were just not happy about it. And then when Bonaparte actually swung through Rastatt on his way back to Paris, remember, he was recalled from the Italian front, and instead of going back straight to Paris, which is a much shorter trip, he actually swung up into Rastatt, which is a much longer trip to the north. And he made the Austrians agree to pull out of Mainz while he was there. And if you remember, Mainz is a fortress city that's kind of on the Austrian frontier, and it was a place the French had basically lost a garrison for a long time. It had been encircled during the repetitive advances and retreats. Our ancestors bled for you, now you owe us this thumb bite. Pretty much. So the entire mindset of these princes, as Napoleon rolls through and says, you're going to give up Mainz too, and the Austrians say, okie dokie, is here we are. The Austrians didn't protect us, and now here we are at this Congress. They're abdicating the responsibilities of the empire, of the Holy Roman Empire, by just handing out another piece of territory. So yeah, we're gonna probably angle on the side of the French here, because that's the only play we've got. But the withdrawal from Mainz is a pretty big deal historically, because it was a further retreat from the Rhine and further capitulation to the French by the Holy Roman Empire led by the Austrians. And in response to this withdrawal from Mainz, there was a German journalist named Josef Goras, and he wrote, quote, "On 30 December 1797, the day of the handing over of Mainz at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there died peacefully and blessedly, at the ripe old age of 955 years, 5 months, and 28 days, as a result of total enervation and a final stroke, completely conscious and comforted by the holy sacraments, the Holy Roman Empire of ponderous memory." End quote. And what Goras is saying here is that this was the nail. This was the nail in the coffin for the concept of the Holy Roman Empire. And he wasn't wrong. This isn't the end of the Holy Roman Empire officially. Its official dissolution as a conglomerate is a couple of years off. It will cease to be a thing in 1806, following Emperor Napoleon's victory at Austerlitz. And that's a famous victory we're going to cover in depth when we get into Season 2. But Goras is not far off here. This is the beginning of the end. Well, the beginning of the end was a while ago. But this is the clarion call, the klaxon going off that the Holy Roman Empire is now dead man walking. It's not dead yet, but it's dying from self-inflicted wounds, several of which were delivered by the Austrians, effectively to the Austrians and the rest of the Holy Roman Empire at this Second Congress of Rastatt. And the Austrians were, for their part, blissfully unaware of their impending doom. They took a look around and surveyed Europe and said, the French didn't beat us that badly. Seeing this total domination of their forces in Italy by Bonaparte is more of an aberration, because every time the French had crossed the Rhine, Austria had just booted them back across the river. So, even as the Austrians were agreeing to things in principle, it was clear that they were starting to take a look at the treaty they had signed, Campo Formio, which was the Austrian peace treaty, and they were starting to view it kind of as a ceasefire. And that's actually what the Leoben preliminaries were. They were the ceasefire. They laid down preliminary rules and outlines for the treaty they would sign later at Campo Formio. And the Austrians started to see Campo Formio, because they were retreating back to this mindset of, well, who beat us but Bonaparte? And Campo Formio was forming in their mind as it's just a ceasefire, not the pillars of lasting stable peace in Europe. So though the Congress of Rastatt agreed to French control of the left bank of the Rhine in March 1798, and then compensation to those affected princes with ecclesiastic property was given a month later in April, but this was a whole lot of kicking the can down the road here, right? It was, we're going to appease the French by giving them the left bank. No, we have to appease those princes, those electors, because it did matter if you wanted to be re-elected Holy Roman Empire, Emperor, if you wanted your family to get that done next time, you just couldn't upset these princes. They did get to vote. So we have to give them something. Let's give them church property. And now we've upset the church by giving those princes church property. So domino after domino after domino is falling inside the Holy Roman Empire, where in order to keep one party happy, they have to piss off somebody else. But then Bonaparte and 40,000 men sailed for Egypt a month later, like we talked about last week.
Clonk that follow button.
And when he left, when the news came in that Napoleon's no longer in Europe, that's when everything at Rastatt just ground to a complete halt. The flip side of that coin is the French thought they were about to basically conquer the entire Mediterranean. They had a significant part of Italy already. And while the French were watching Napoleon sail away to, certain victory in Egypt, the Austrians were watching the one guy who had really given them significant trouble, consistently been able to beat them. They just watched him sail very far away. So you have a situation here where the French are overconfident. They think that their army and to a degree it is, that their army is the reason they're winning. But armies can be great and with poor leadership do nothing. Their army was good. For all of the conjecture around Napoleon, he was a brilliant general. And when you send your most brilliant general away, the vultures started to circle again, and France was too flippantly arrogant about their position strategically to think Napoleon was that critical. While at the same time, the Austrians are going, the lead wolf is gone. And all this bantering and stuff we've had to give up, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe now that he's gone, what if something happens to him while he's there that makes it impossible for him to come home? Well, if that happens, maybe we're back in the driver's seat here. So the Directory's supreme confidence that they were about to be masters of the whole world then got a little bit further of a boost in spring 1798, when the Irish again rose up in rebellion. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on Ireland. By the way, for those of you that are curious, our good friend Case, who said hello earlier and is hanging out, if you're wondering whereabouts he is, it's like up here somewhere. Just to give you a general sense of where Case is in Ireland, it's over there. But the Irish rise up. Now, the Irish question has been a thing since the failed invasion by Lazar Host due to weather. Dr. Death Games, 24 months at Tier 3. Tier 3 helps me do exactly what's on your screen right now, which is have a look at the map. The map is professionally done, and I'm able to purchase that based off your Tier 2 and Tier 3 support. So thank you very much. But remember, this isn't the first time we've talked about Ireland as a part of this series. We've attempted, the French have, to invade once, and the weather in December was so poor that the entire French fleet got scattered, and no boot ever was really put down in Ireland. Some boots got put down in England, but they also got destroyed. But the Irish rise up again. Part of what's going on here is that Bonaparte had convinced the Directory that, attacking England itself was pretty asinine, that it was a suicide mission, it wasn't going to work. But the idea of dragging the British into some sort of quagmire in Ireland to draw their strength away still seemed to be a perfectly reasonable ambition for the French. And there had been patriotic Irishmen in France since right before the revolution got kicked off, when the Estates General got called. People come in to watch these sorts of things from other countries because, and as you'll see when we get to Soviet Union down the road, is revolutionaries are always looking for ideas from successful revolutions. So when they see revolutions get going, they take notes on what works and what doesn't, so they can take these ideas back home. They can export revolution. That's actually what the West is entirely afraid of with communism during the Cold War, by the way. But there were patriotic Irishmen in Paris, particularly one very famous one named Wolfe Tone. And he had actually been in France telling the French for years during the Revolution that all the Irish needed was money and guns and, a stiff backbone made up of some professional French soldiers, and the Irish could make serious trouble for Britain and Ireland. Trouble that Wolfe Tone hoped would eventually culminate in independence for Ireland. Now, the French, as we know, tried and failed this once in 1796 when Lazar Host's invasion went off the rails, but again, that was just weather. And realistically, when you look at it, it probably was just weather. It was just, why did you launch it across the English Channel in December? But the failed French invasion of 1796 had served to put the British on notice that the Irish might actually be serious about this, about rising up. So the British sent authorities in, and those authorities began to play Protestant patriots, mostly up in Ulster, against Catholic patriots. Now, Ulster, for those of you that don't know where Ulster is, I'm going to circle it broadly, K's, don't be mad, but this area, it's up north. When I think historically of Ulster, I'm thinking up there. So there was a huge Protestant density in Northern Ireland, and there was a patriotic Catholic density much throughout the rest of Ireland. And the idea of the British was, let's make them fight each other so that they can't fight us as effectively. Both of these sides, the Catholic Irish Patriots and the Protestant Irish Patriots, wanted an independent Ireland at this time in history. And they had come together to form a coalition that was called the United Irishmen. But the British, in their work in Ireland at this time, were doing a pretty good job convincing the Protestant patriots that, hey, if you guys pull this off, look at the density and the ratios here. There's far more Catholics. And the Catholics are going to just hand Ireland to the Pope if you guys get independence. Is that what you Protestants really want, or do you want the protection of the Anglican Church? And then it worked to a degree. It separated the patriotic Protestants from the patriotic Catholics in Ireland. With the Irish Patriot movement kind of divided, the British authorities then began to crack down in Ireland in March 1798. And Ireland was kind of put under de facto martial law. And authorities swept through Dublin. For those of you that don't know where Dublin is on this side over here. It's County Dublin, City of Dublin right there. But the British came through, especially through Dublin, cracked down, busting everybody that had been identified as a potential Irish rebel leader. And though this sweep was thorough, the British didn't get everybody. And because you have patriot leaders of both groups, Protestant and Catholic, watching what's going on, obviously the British are trying to end this before it gets started. This might be our only chance. And they all started to think again that it's now or never. We need to do something. So these leaders planned a general uprising, the Catholic leaders especially, that would begin in Dublin and the surrounding counties right around Dublin, and then hopefully just spread like a wave throughout Ireland. And they set it to begin on May 23rd, 1798. But as always happens with these plots, apparently in the 1790s, on the eve of the revolt, the entire plan was betrayed. So when the Irish Patriots started to gather in Dublin at their agreed rendezvous points, they were surprised by sudden swarms of British soldiers. And this insurrection that was supposed to start in Dublin, this major wellspring of Irish freedom, was just quashed before it ever really got started. But a few of the rebels in the surrounding counties did manage to get their uprisings off the ground. They actually were able to get something going. But all of those uprisings were then put down in a matter of a couple of days. And then a little late to the party, our Protestant freedom fighters up in Ulster decided to join the already kind of semi-failed uprising in early June. But then they too were defeated very swiftly within a few days. So there was a tremendous lack of coordination in the way that the Irish Patriots tried to stand up and rebel. But this did get the attention of the British. They were going, they are serious about this, and our efforts to separate the Protestants and the Catholics didn't work because, look, Dublin had an uprising and Ulster had an uprising. And yeah, they weren't coordinated, but obviously we haven't convinced them that, at least the Protestants for sure, that staying with Britain is the right way to go. So to deal with this sudden flare-up of rebellion, the British ministry appointed a new Lord Lieutenant to Ireland, a man with both military and administrative experience. And that man is our old friend from American history, George Cornwallis. Yes, that General Cornwallis, the man who surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown and ended the War for American Independence. Now, George Cornwallis is an interesting guy all on his own. We're not going to get into his biography, but he's seen historically as a loser because he was the guy who surrendered. But Cornwallis, of all of the British generals in the American colonies during the American Revolution, probably the most capable. He was absolutely the most committed to winning for the British, but he was hamstrung by the fact that he wasn't in overall command. there was a triumvirate, I love that term, and so does history apparently, there was a triumvirate of British generals who were over top of him, who had all successively screwed up along the way, and Cornwallis was just relegated to the south, where he couldn't do much against what was a guerrilla insurrection from the southern colonists, so he gets tagged with, like, loser, and that takes along the connotation of not capable. He was a capable guy, and he is in charge in Ireland. So this rebellion that Cornwallis dealt with in Ireland was by no means over. Down in the Wicklow Mountains, south of Dublin, a rebel general and about 1,000 Irish patriots managed to open up a guerrilla campaign against the British. And guerrilla campaigns against the regular armies of nations at this point in history are disasters for the regular army. They just aren't trained to fight that way. The French and Indian War is a great example of that as well, where the Native American tactics were just so foreign to the British that it took them a while to figure out how to fight them, and that's why British losses were so bad early in the North American sector of the 7 Years' War. But this guerrilla insurrection down in the Wicklow Mountains lasted, years. It lasted way longer than the rest of what we're going to talk about here. And this is even after the general, who kind of coordinated it all to begin with, was surrendered. He had to surrender. He had to surrender himself because he himself was surrounded in October 1798. So it goes on for years and years and years beyond that. And the concept of this guerrilla war of the Irish against the British is, not just singularly unique to this section of Irish history. It's effectively what the Irish did for centuries against the British. But the real action was down further south in Wexford, which was not supposed to be the center of things. And Wexford is down here. Hopefully I'm impressing K's with my ability to just pinpoint where things are on the Irish map, by the way. But that's where Wexford is. It wasn't supposed to be the center of things. Dublin, Ulster, they were supposed to be where things got going. But Wexford turned out to be a pretty focused center of rebellious activity against the British. An uprising started there on May 27, 1798, after the initial rebel defeats in Dublin had kind of just taken care of themselves. But once the Wexford section of the uprising got going, it suddenly had an army about 10,000 men strong, and they easily expelled the British authorities. They declared themselves to be the starting kernel of a new Irish republic. Then they attempted to break out of Wexford and get out of the county and spread the rebellion to the rest of Southern Ireland. But in a series of running battles with the British through June, these rebels were defeated, culminating finally with a legitimately major engagement called the Battle of Vinegar Hill, which pitted 20,000 Irish against 18,000 British. Those are Napoleon numbers. Those are big-time numbers. That's what we've been talking about elsewhere in this narrative. That's not small at all. But when the Irish were beaten at Vinegar Hill, that was pretty much the end of the Irish Rebellion of 1798. So you're probably wondering why I just spent a significant portion of time and over 2 pages of my own outline talking about an Irish uprising when I have 2.5 episodes left before I put Napoleon in supreme power in France. Where the hell are the French in all this? Well, that's exactly what the Irish were asking. Because they weren't exactly punctual. The French were coordinating with the Irish, and you'll notice up to this point, to the Battle of Vinegar Hill, I haven't mentioned the French being a part of it at all, because they weren't. They certainly were encouraging the Irish and saying, we're going to come help you, but they hadn't landed any assistance that Wolfe Tone had asked for when the Irish decided to stand up. Now, if the Irish had waited, or had this been more properly coordinated, things could have been a whole lot different in Ireland. But the not exactly punctual French did not land their first waves of support until August 22nd, which is months after everything was done and dusted for the Irish. And this first wave of support was only 1,000 men under General Jean-Joseph Amabel Humbert, who's not on the board, because it's the only time I'm mentioning him. He was the first French general in this wave to land. Yes, they landed pretty much 2 months after the Irish rebellion had been fully suppressed, apart from the rebel fighting, the guerrilla fighting going on down in the mountains. And when the French did land, they did so up in northwest Ireland, which was nowhere near the center of the action. So you have to understand that the Irish Catholic freedom fighters were fighting effectively through this area of Ireland. You had an Ulster Rebellion up here, but this blue line coming in is where the French are landing in August 1798. Nowhere near where anything else had been going on in Ireland. And they landed with only 1,000 troops. But when Humbert did land, he told the locals, hey, another 3,000 troops are coming. Do you want us here or not? Do you want our help or not? And about 1,000 Irishmen up in the northwest did rally to Humbert's banner, and a few days later, this combined French-Irish army actually beat 6,000 British militia in a battle that is called the Castlebar Races. Now, Case let me know that he's really close to Castlebar. And I didn't tell him I was going to talk about this tonight, but during the week, I showed him the map, and he said, I'm really close to Castlebar. So the Castlebar Races occur. We'll point out where Castlebar is for you guys. Castlebar is right here, right where this little cross swords is. That's the area we're talking about for this battle now. The Castlebar Races take place up there between this combined French-Irish force and about 6,000 British militia. And it's called the Castlebar Races because first, the British militia raced in to block the French advance on the fortress of Castlebar. And then the British raced away from Castlebar when these militiamen got their first taste of a professional bayonet charge. And after this initial victory, Humbert's plan was to just march up into Ulster. So he was going to go and say, I've won here. I want to just head this way and turn up that way. That was his plan. Well, the French marched along with this Irish, this mixed unit that they had, and they really had not found or been able to rally anyone else to the cause. They just couldn't find anybody else to support what they were doing because, remember, the actual uprising had happened 2 months earlier. So everyone had a bad taste in their mouth already. They had seen an uprising very recently just get smashed. Why would they run to the banner of yet another one that doesn't seem all that strong, especially compared to what happened down in Wexford? That was a big fight. This isn't a big army that's marching. So they just couldn't get anybody to rally to this march from Castlebar to Ulster. So while Humbert is marching, Lord Cornwallis gathers up two pretty massive forces, about 15,000 men each, mostly militia, to protect Dublin, because that's where he thought Humbert was going, and then to go track down the French-Irish force. And it took a while. But in September 1798, Humbert's little army was finally cornered and surrounded, and he had to surrender on September 15th. Now, this is really important. The French soldiers were allowed to be taken prisoner under civilized terms. And then they were repatriated back to France, which is kind of how war worked. As long as you went home and there was a vow to never raise your arms again against us during this conflict, you were free to go. But their Irish comrades, on the other hand, were either summarily shot if they ran, they were just tracked down and hung. There was no repatriation or rehabilitation for the Irish who stood up for independence. And this is the way it went throughout the Irish Rebellion of 1798. Every confrontation, Irish rebels were shown zero mercy if the British were the victor. But what about those other 3,000 troops, you ask? Those ones Humbert said were well on their way. Well, they also took their sweet time to get moving, and they did not land in Ireland until October 1798, a good 4 months after the initial rebellion and 1 full month after Humbert surrendered. This latest and stupefyingly late attempt by the French to land troops at Ireland then came to disaster itself. When they reached the Irish coast, there was a British naval squadron waiting for them. And after about 3 hours of fighting at sea, the French fleet had to surrender. And in this encounter, the great Irish revolutionary Wolfe Tone was on board one of those captured vessels. And he actually was in the middle of a landing attempt, like getting ready to land on Irish soil, when the British scooped him up as a part of everything. And that's how Wolfe Tone is taken in by the British, convicted of treason, and hanged 1 month later in November 1798. So the Directory rolled into the Irish Rebellion with a fair amount of, again, heady arrogance. Oh yeah, we're going to go up there and help the Irish because we're sure we can't invade Britain. Napoleon's made that pretty clear, and whether we like him or not, he's not stupid strategically. But let's go help the Irish. And then it was so poorly organized on both sides of the Irish and French that just didn't get anywhere. And it was like throwing sticks into a fire instead of rolling a log down a hill. Had it been correctly coordinated, it would have been a very different story for Great Britain and Ireland's history. But it wasn't. And because it was so poorly coordinated, the British could effectively play whack-a-mole against the Irish. Go, bam, Ulster. Bam, Dublin. Bam, Wexford. Bam, whatever army's coming out of Castlebar. Bam, the last fleet that's coming in because they can't beat the British Navy. If it had been concentrated, the British would have been in a much dire set of straits. Cornwallis maybe pulls it out anyway because he is that gifted as a commander, but it certainly looks different. And instead, as 1798 rolls to an end in Ireland, the Directory looks up there and goes, oh yay, another cataclysm for our efforts in Ireland. And our best general is in Egypt. Maybe because we haven't heard from him in a long time. Because ever since Aboukir Bay, we haven't been able to get in touch with Napoleon. We have no idea what he's doing, how well it's going, or when he might be coming home. So, by the fall and into the winter of 1798, that supreme confidence of the Directory has been shaken a bit. And we're going to talk, when we come back, about that march now to war. The growing confidence and reasons why several of the coalition allies decided to go in against France, and France going, uh-oh, and having to do some things in order to get ready to fight this burgeoning coalition without Napoleon at the head of their armies. I feel modern Irish history would be a lot different had it worked out. I think there are many places in Irish history, if things had been better coordinated, they would have had a much better lot in life, to be sure. But the uprisings of 1798, which were backed by a foreign power to a degree, were one of those critical moments in Irish history where, had it gone the other way and been handled better, maybe things are really different in Ireland. But we're going to take our first break. We're going to come back after the break and talk about that burgeoning coalition, the players in it, why they decided, well, we can't tolerate France anymore, and why Austria did what they did, and then what the final straw on the camel's back was that just rolled it all into war and creates the second coalition. And then we're going to talk about some of the problems in the second coalition. So thank you for hanging out tonight. Thank you for the audio troubleshooting at the beginning. Again, Doc, Berlin, Rocket, Dustin, thank you for the resubs. It's much appreciated, especially those Tier 2 and Tier 3 subs that help me pay for the maps that are on the screen. We're going to put the Ireland map away. We're going to come back and talk about Russia and the Ottoman Empire and Austria and Italy and lots of other places. So get a drink, stand up, take a break, stretch your legs for sure, and I'll be back in a few minutes. remember to clonk that follow button.
Let's rock!
We're back. Hopefully you got a little bit of a stretch of your legs in there. Let's get that map of Ireland off of there, and let's get our drawing off of there, because we're going to go back to the big map, the bigger map. And I know it's not greatly in focus because it's a huge map, but that's what we're talking about now. There's one more map hiding behind there, because I want to illustrate something later on as we get into talks about the Ottomans and the Russians. But for now, the big map's up there just so you can focus on where's Ireland and where's the Austrian Empire and where's the Russian Empire. And just so you know, the Ottoman Empire is effectively all of this, and not so much all of Greece, but further down into the Dardanelles, the Black Sea area. This area here is going to become a point of conversation here shortly as well, just so you can orient yourself on what we're talking about. So like I said, after things went badly in Ireland, the Directory, who was really arrogant and really confident as Napoleon sailed away for Egypt, is now not so confident and not so arrogant because things haven't gone so well for them. Their efforts in Ireland come to nothing. And remember, you have to remember that all of the stuff in Ireland was going down, and while they were simultaneously digesting the news of Horatio Nelson's destruction of the entire French fleet at Aboukir Bay at the Battle of the Nile. And I'm going to come back to this point several times tonight. It was this French defeat in Egypt, the naval defeat at the hands of Nelson, more than anything else, which really got the ball rolling on the Second Coalition. Because Nelson's defeat of the French brought two players into the game, the Russians and the Ottomans. We're going to talk about Russia first. Ever since the fall of the Bastille, Catherine the Great's Russia had been one of revolutionary France's most consistent, harshest critics. The Russian court also was the most stable and generous benefactor of all of the émigré nobles who had left France, where Austria and Prussia and Britain had treated the émigrés as a nuisance. Remember, they were kind of pushed the Comte d'Artois out everywhere he went. Russia showered these nobles with money and gifts, and if any of them happened to make it to St. Petersburg, because that was the Russian capital, they received a very warm reception in the Russian court. As you may have noticed or recall, the Russians were nowhere to be found during the first coalition against France in 1793. Now, Russia did close all of its ports to all French shipping during the time period of the War of the First Coalition, but Catherine the Great refused to participate in any actual fighting. As she declined to participate, though she was actively pushing the Austrians and the Prussians to declare war, no doubt hoping that they would get bogged down in that fighting. You have to remember that this time period for Catherine the Great is when she's partitioning Poland. She wants to create basically a hegemony over what's left of Poland. And you can see the Duchy of Warsaw on this map, which is really what is left of Poland as we roll into the Napoleonic era truly. The Duchy of Warsaw there is really all that's left of Poland. But Catherine's aims were to, yeah, Austria, yeah, Prussia, you guys should go take care of France. They're on your borders. Of course you should deal with that. Take your armies and move them over there and deal with France, because I got my eyes on Poland, and it'll be a whole lot easier for me if you're over there doing that. So she didn't get involved. She wanted a much freer hand in Eastern Europe, because at the same time as she's eyeballing Poland, remember, again, Russia is concluding its hostilities with the Ottomans. They've been fighting for a while, I think it's 7 years. And the Ottomans were getting the snot kicked out of them and having to concede into the Caucasus Mountains and give territory to Russia, shaping the Russia we know today. Now, things didn't work out exactly as Catherine the Great planned, because when she did make her move on Poland, you remember there was that period of, why is no one fighting? Because Prussia and Austria diverted the bulk of their military forces over to say, whoa, we see you over there. They wanted to be right there with military pressure on Russia as Poland was being divvied up. Both times it happened. So that Catherine the Great couldn't just take it all for herself. She had to give pieces to Prussia and pieces to Austria to get them to go along with what she was doing. And after the Third Polish Partition in 1795, Catherine was still looking south toward Turkey and toward Greece as the center of Russian foreign policy rather than towards France. She did, by the way, during this last Polish partition, secure a promise from the Austrians during the whole negotiations over what to do with Poland, that if Russia went south toward Greece and toward Turkey, that the Austrians would support her in doing so. But for Russia, it really wasn't until Napoleon Bonaparte started kicking the snot out of the Austrians that, down in Italy, that Catherine the Great kind of lifted her head up and looked over there and said, it's a pretty just far away. France isn't exactly close. But maybe this French Republic, which I really hate, this actually might be a problem. This Napoleon guy especially. Catherine the Great's building Russia into a power for the first time. It came out of nowhere in Eastern Europe, and it's largely because of Catherine the Great that Russia is a power today. This rising empire of hers was not under any threat from the French. She was very much playing three-dimensional chess with the Austrians and the Prussians to get them to do what she wanted without having to commit to it herself while she eyeballed what she really wanted. But then as the French started to succeed against the Austrians in Italy, and Austria would go, whoa, peace. Catherine goes, wait a sec, what's going on over there? I thought the Austrians could take care of that. And as the Austrians were getting pushed out of Italy, she promised to raise 64,000 Russians to come and join that fight. But Catherine the Great's pledge came with a major qualification. She demanded that the now neutral, in that time frame, Prussians had to also pledge 64,000 troops and re-enter the war. The Prussians had backed out a while ago. They weren't fighting anymore. And it's very obvious what she was up to again. Let's get the Prussians to re-engage so that my much nearer Western problem of Prussia and Austria is then re-embroiled in France. Yeah, I'll support them a little bit now because I have to if I want to keep them busy there. But she also pretty much knew that the Prussians weren't going to get back into the war. So it's safe to say that Catherine the Great hated the French Revolution with every fiber of her being. She really did. But she also was a pragmatist. She was a very smart ruler. And so long as no vital Russian interests were at stake, her vitriolic hatred of the French never translated into action by the Russians. But Russian foreign policy changed almost overnight in November 1796, specifically November 17th, 1796, because that was the day Catherine the Great died. It's the second time a major death has occurred and has led into a war of some coalition, if you remember. And her very unstable son, Paul I, inherited the throne. Some background here on Paul I. He was not a kid when he took the throne. He was not under 18. Catherine the Great became empress because Paul's father died, maybe was murdered by Catherine the Great, and she ruled as regent in Paul's name. And then Paul left his minority, became of age to become emperor of Russia. And she said, no, dear, sit down, I have this. And she refused to give it up. And that's why she reigned for so long. So this snubbed kid who grew into a snubbed adult who felt he had effectively been held down by his mother's boot from his birthright takes over in Russia. And Paul happened to be even more anti-revolutionary than his mother. And he had actually spent a lot of time among these French emigres which had come to the St. Petersburg court. So when he became Tsar, he tossed aside all of the prudence that his mother had been laboring under and decided to make Russia aggressively anti-French. Before the Leoben peace preliminaries were signed in April 1797, Tsar Paul I, not yet Tsar, but soon to be Tsar Paul I, Prince Paul, offered to come down and mediate between the Austrians and the French, but given his hatred of the French, his thumb would have been on the Austrian scale the whole time as a mediator. Then the French in those discussions, the French abandoning the left bank of the Rhine would have absolutely been a prerequisite for any sort of peace that was going to be mediated by Paul at Leoben. And when the Austrians signed those preliminaries, giving up the left bank of the Rhine to France, Paul was pretty incensed that they had given in to all the demands the French had made, and he started to escalate Russia's involvement in the West. As the Treaty of Campo Formio neared completion of September 1797, Paul declared himself, wait for it, the protector of Malta. Now, this is September 1797. This is before Napoleon leaves for Egypt. So, before Napoleon leaves for Egypt, Tsar Paul I of Russia declares Malta to be a Russian protectorate. Then, in the early months of 1798, Russian spies began to report that the French were massing some huge fleet in the Mediterranean and that General Bonaparte was going somewhere with it. Where they were headed at the time was, of course, a mystery. It was a mystery to Napoleon's own troops until they left Malta. But Tsar Paul and his ministers decided that the French were going to try to take a stab right at Russia. So let that one sink in for a second. Here's Toulon. They thought that somehow, here's Russia. Basically, here's Russia. Somehow, the Tsar had convinced himself that the French were going to sail out of Toulon, come along the Mediterranean, shoot the Dardanelles, shoot the Bosphorus Strait, and somehow come at Russia directly, right? Bypassing they're now kind of at peace with Austria and Prussia, and just go right at Russia, which is, yes, insane. It's an insane theory. Even Napoleon wasn't that crazy in terms of his ambition. Remember that the much more rational council of Nelson's leadership in the fleet said, it's either going to be, Constantinople, or down here it's going to Alexandria. One of those two places. And Constantinople was reasonable, but I don't think Russia was. And I still think Constantinople was a stretch. But anyway, Tsar Paul and his advisors had convinced themselves that when Napoleon left, he was gunning for Russia. Maybe they were going to roll right into Poland somehow and try to revive that French or that Polish revolutionary cause that all three of those powers surrounding Poland have been trying to snuff out for a while now. It would have been an insane thing for the French to go right at Russia. It would have been an insane thing for the French to attempt to get to Poland, because how would a fleet get to Poland? Here is basically where Poland would have sat for some sort of revival of rebellion. How does a fleet get there? Are they sailing from Toulon and going through Gibraltar and then sailing the English Channel and then around the North Sea to get there? Both of those two ideas are so scatterbrained nonsense that it really takes somebody who's in his own head to convince themselves that that's what the French were up to. It would have had a better chance over land. Hey, by the way, now that we're done with you, Austria, can we have a military transit agreement so that our forces may move through your territory unmolested? If I was Austria, I'd be like, yeah, probably that's not a bad idea, because I'd love to trap you behind our lines if something should happen. But this didn't stop Tsar Paul's paranoid flights of fancy. They were paranoid. So the Russians continued to escalate, and they continued to escalate, and they continued to escalate. They were now in close contact with the British, who were naturally urging the Russians to join the fight, and soon enough, Russia had a fleet patrolling the North Sea. Not the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, which freed up the British. You're wondering how Horatio Nelson was able to get reinforcements? Well, with the Russians patrolling the North Sea, just patrolling it. What's up, Arky? The British were able to redeploy and send some additional naval units down to the Mediterranean under Nelson, which led to everything going great for him at the Nile. Now, probably the French commander had a whole lot more to do with things going badly at the Nile than the British commander did, but Nelson still was on his game there. So it should come as no surprise to learn that when Bonaparte seized Malta, newly minted protectorate of the Russian Empire, the Tsar Paul I pretty much took that as a declaration of war from France. Now remember, Napoleon made the decision to go to Malta in response to a near miss with the British fleet. I'm pretty sure stopping at Malta was not in the plan that he had discussed with the Directory. So, Napoleon lands, seizes Malta. Russia looks over there and says, okay, that's it. A very aggressive, angry Tsar Paul I pretty much takes it as a declaration of war. Now, if Bonaparte's invasion was pushing Russia in the direction of open war, when the destination of the French invasion turned out to be Egypt, that pushed Russia's longtime enemies, the Ottomans, on alert. Now remember, Egypt was pretty independent, right? It was under the Mamelukes, and they kind of had broad autonomy. It was still part of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans were pretty shocked to discover that they all of a sudden had something to fear from revolutionary France. So among all of the amazing accomplishments that Bonaparte's invasion of Egypt was able to do, the Egyptian investigations, the Rosetta Stone, all of the scientific and cultural discoveries that were part of that, plus the grand string of military victories, it created something that would have been unthinkable, seriously, months beforehand. A Russian-Turkish-Ottoman alliance. The Russians and Turks were, at that point in history, about as bitter a pair of enemies that you were going to find anywhere on the planet. I mean, we historically think of this period of time as Britain and France being very bitter enemies. But the Russians and the Turks were really bitter enemies. They've been that way since the middle of the 18th century. Russia had been pretty well just beating up on the Ottoman Empire, most recently in a war that I just mentioned. Had been running from 1787 to 1792. So, what's that, 5 years, not 7. Essentially, as I said, since the mid-1700s, Russia had been expanding south at the expense of the Ottoman Empire. The Turks and the French, meanwhile, had always basically gotten along just fine. Yeah, the French Republic was in every way the polar opposite of the Ottoman Sultanate, but they were really far away from each other. And the French and the Turks had been trading partners and diplomatically friendly for a long time, longer than anybody could really remember, back to the time of Louis XIV. So even as the French were cutting off the king's head or eliminating the entire aristocracy, the Turks were still inviting French military advisors and engineers to come over and help them modernize their empire, because they're going, someone has to help us. Russia's just beating down our door and all we have are sticks, effectively. The first hint that France might be a danger to the Ottomans was when Bonaparte extracted all of the Ionian Islands, which at one time had been part of the property of the Venetians. Now, the Ionian Sea is, you're talking about up here. So when Bonaparte extracts, I'm sorry, this is the Ionian Sea. I'm wrong. My brain just farted on that one. So when Bonaparte extracts all of these islands in the Ionian Sea from Venice, they belong to Venice. He extracts them. Well, that's awfully close to the Ottoman Empire. He extracts them for France. When that happened, the Ottomans were like, okay, that's a little bit closer to home than the French usually are, and who's Napoleon? But the Ottomans were still shocked to find that this French fleet that was massing at Toulon was actually heading to Egypt. Yes, again, Egypt was one of the more independent regions of the Ottoman Empire, but it was still theirs. And they had no idea why the French were doing what they were doing. The French were doing it, of course, because they wanted to disrupt the ability of French traders to trade over the Suez, and then they wanted to capture it and build a canal there and control trade out of the Mediterranean. But the problem here is that Istanbul, and I'm going to use Istanbul and Constantinople interchangeably because it's important to understand they're the same city. Istanbul was fed by Egyptian grain. Now, how does Egypt make grain? Well, remember, the Nile Delta is pretty fertile. It's fresh water running to the Mediterranean, and the Egyptian Nile Delta had fed empires for forever. It had fed the Roman Empire. That's why Augustus wanted it for himself. So when Egyptian grain gets interrupted by Napoleon's invasion, it hit the Turkish capital really hard. And at first there seemed to be very little that the Ottomans could do about the fact that their breadbasket had just been detached from them. The Ottomans militarily were absolutely no match for the French on their own. So massing an army and sending it to Egypt would leave the rest of their territories and a still potentially belligerent Russia to their north. It would leave the rest of their territory severely ungarrisoned, lightly garrisoned to be sure. The Ottoman Empire was really big, but it didn't mean everyone was really happy to be a part of it either. So by sending a large force down to Egypt, they risked attack from Russia, and they risked internal revolt and rebellion. But again, Nelson's victory at Abukir Bay changed the entire equation. Suddenly, Bonaparte's force down in Egypt was not an ultra-modern powerhouse that couldn't be stopped. It was stranded. It was an unsupported orphan in a foreign land, trapped there. With the British now able to rule the Mediterranean, thanks to the Russians patrolling the North Sea, they started to ask the Russians started to ask the Ottomans, hey, can we put aside our differences here to do something about France? Because Paul I was Mads, 24 months tier 1, thank you very much. So as Nelson defeats the French fleet at Abukir Bay, the British and especially the Russians start going to the Ottomans, hey, can we put aside our differences to take on what Paul I called the frenzied French Republic? Again, these guys had been fighting for 40 years, the Russians and the Ottomans. But it was now in their mutual self-interest for them to work against the French. The Russians just wanted to do it because Tsar Paul I was kind of fanatically anti-French. The Ottomans really wanted to do it because they needed to feed their people again, and they needed help getting the French out of Egypt. So that's how the Ottomans got involved, and that's how they actually ended up sending armies from Syria and Rhodes down to Egypt, because they had British and Russian help in doing so. That's what we talked about in part during episode 1.42 last week. And that was when, at the end of 1798, the craziest thing of all happened. The Russian fleet in the Black Sea. And this is to blow up this a little bit for you. The Black Sea is down here. And the Russians have always kept a fleet in the Black Sea. But the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, which had been bottled up there by the Ottomans because the Ottomans controlled the Bosphorus, Istanbul sat on it.
I'm the naked power behind the throne.
The Russian fleet in the Black Sea was permitted by the Ottomans to sail through the Bosphorus. That's the strait that connected the Black Sea through the Dardanelles to the Aegean Sea. It is unheard of for this to have happened. These guys, months prior, were daggers at each other. And all of a sudden, in order to get Napoleon out of Egypt and to begin aggressive action against France, the Ottomans said, come on through. This was to allow the Russians to undertake joint operations with the Turks and to expel the French from all of those islands in the Ionian Sea as well, because the Ottomans weren't happy about that either.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
And again, this is just a stunning thing to have happened. Just 6 months earlier, the thought that the Turks would invite the Russians to sail on past Istanbul, their capital, would have been unthinkable. But here we are, and the Russians sailed on by and waved their hands to go fight their new mutual enemy with the Ottomans, the French. So at this point, I'm going to put that map back under. I wanted to show you that blow up so you'd understand where they were coming from, because it is insane that happened. But we're going to go ahead and move the Russians. Hey, the Russians. Can I move the Russians? Thank you. The Russians, for the first time, over there with the Ottomans. And the list of Second Coalition members grows. Yes, there are formal declarations of war, blah, blah, blah to come. But we're setting the stage for the Second Coalition. Meanwhile, back in France, the French were pretty aware that Europe was starting to mobilize against them. Significant portions of Europe and Asia Minor were beginning to mobilize against them. So, to get going on their own mobilization, the on-again, off-again General Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, who you remember was fired by the Directory from the Rhine, he became a delegate on the Council of 500, and sitting on that council, he introduced in September 1798 a new conscription law, which would soon bear his name, the Jourdan Law. And what the Jourdan Law did was prescribe compulsory military service for all unmarried men aged 20 to 25 in France. These young men were supposed to register according to their birth dates, and the government, if the government decided to, hey, we might have to call you up and activate this whole draft, oh, it's just in paper right now, they would be taken in cohorts from youngest to oldest. Then, just a few weeks later, September the 24th, 1798 to be exact, the Directory activated the draft prescribed under the Jourdan Law. Now, we know that in the past, conscription in France has proved to be pretty difficult. The initial levy under this draft was set to be 203,000. But as men came forward, as they were called, nearly 60,000 of them were deemed medically unfit for service. And the process of determining fitness for service was left to local administrators, who made a habit of exempting their friends and relatives and neighbors and anyone who could pay them. So of the 143,000 who were then deemed fit for service, only about 97,000 showed up on the day they were told to show up. And of those 97,000 who showed up, about 25,000 deserted on the trip between their hometown muster point and the front line. So of the 200,000 men who were drafted under the Jourdan Law, who are supposed to be reinforcing the lines down in Italy and along the Rhine, only about 74,000 actually made it there by the spring of 1799. And to jump ahead a little bit, these conscription issues were really alarming to the Directory because by the spring of 1799, war will have been officially declared. So, because of that concern, in April 1799, the Directory is going to alter the Jourdan Law, even though they're not supposed to be able to do anything with relation to legislation, according to the Constitution. And the alterations will allow for replacements to be purchased. Now, what that means is I don't want to go, I'm going to pay someone else to go in my place. The Civil War is going to do this too in America as well. When rich aristocratic Americans are not going to want to be conscripted to fight, they're going to pay for themselves and their sons to have a replacement sent instead. But the changes in April 1799 by the Directory, pretty unconstitutionally, are going to allow for replacements to be purchased and for volunteers to step up and say, I want to go instead of that guy who was drafted. I'll go in his place. People may be outside this 25-year-old age cap. This new system of replacements and volunteers was supposed to raise another 75,000 men, which would have brought the total to 150,000, but only about 57,000 made it to the front through this process. So it's about 130,000-ish troops of 200,000 that they wanted is what they got. A volunteer's tribute. I don't think they're going to play the Hunger Games, though. These issues with conscription and the alterations to the law have two major impacts for the future of France. And I mean into Season 2, Future of France. But first, immediately, France is going to get pushed around pretty badly in the campaigns of 1799. But this law and the changes made by the Directory are going to cement the professionalization of the French army. The great patriotic amateurs who enthusiastically volunteered for the revolutionary armies of old now give way to men who volunteer to make the army their career, their way of life, and their home. And this is very similar to the Marian reforms in the Roman Republic, and what led to its downfall is the idea that let's make the army a career, not just let's serve for the time needed and then walk away. This professionalization of the army that this law permits widens the chasm between civilians who don't want to fight and soldier. And it makes the coming Napoleonic Empire extremely more possible, because you'll now have year upon year upon year of ready-made, ready-to-go troops, seasoned veteran troops who are living their lives in the army, not fighting for a season and going home. The idea that Napoleon as emperor or even first consul is going to be able to put hardened troops on the line against Europe is going to be a big reason why he's successful against Europe. I was thinking more elder brothers, fathers, uncles than might have reason to trade places with a younger man that was called up. That happened. That for sure happened. But there were men who wanted to make the military a career. Especially because, I mean, think about since, Lazare Carnot's modernization efforts in the levée en masse and the full industrialization of the state, the army of France was no joke still. I mean, it's gonna get beaten pretty badly just under the weight of things in 1799. But it wasn't an amateur force. And recent history showed that it was capable of winning because they had just forced the Austrians to surrender. But nowhere was this new Jourdan law more despised than in Belgium. Because remember, Belgium's not Belgium anymore. Right now it's part of France. And shocker of shockers, the locals wouldn't like being subject to French conscription for the first time. And as we discussed a few episodes back, this basically means that Belgium in 1798 into 1799 is the Vendée from the spring of 1793. The local peasants in Belgium were already pretty upset about revolutionary attacks on their traditional church and their aristocracy. Now they were pretty infuriated by the fact that Paris was going to draft them into fight and die for the men who were exploiting them. Does that sound familiar? Because it's pretty much the exact reasons that the people in the Vendée rebelled. You know, on top of we want our king back. So the minute officials came around to begin registering, did they follow the Vendée of Nobility? It's not even going to get that far, Rocket. The point here is that the Directory didn't learn their lesson, right? That tearing down local establishments and traditions and then conscripting people into fight for the system that had just broken apart your local establishments and traditions is a bad way to do things. But the minute officials came around to begin registering the Belgians for the draft, riots broke out. Shocker. These riots soon led to a full-blown peasant uprising in October 1798 that really badly tied up French resources. The Directory had to move French troops in to pacify the region. It also, this uprising in Belgium, helped convince the members of the blossoming Second Coalition that, wait a second, France doesn't seem to have an iron grasp on all of these territories and the sister republics that it's acquired since 1795. The British and the Russians, for example, were soon deep into talks about jointly invading the Netherlands. They had fleets in position to get the French out of there. But that wouldn't be enough to help Belgium, in the current revolt. None of the Belgians had any experience or training or weapons to keep their uprising going for very long. And maybe the Directory didn't learn any lessons, but the French military did. They were able to move in pretty quickly and swept through the Belgian countryside. And, it raged on for a while, this guerrilla insurgency uprising. But really, by December 1798, the French army had gotten most of the Belgian rebellious areas back under control. The point here is this isn't like ancient history in France. The war in the Vendée is 5 years prior and really didn't end until 2 years prior. What were the causes of it? The people in charge in France didn't learn any lessons. Thank goodness for them, the French military knew what to do this time. Because if it hadn't, then you have a rebellious area on the front. Not in your backyard anymore, away from the fighting, that you can kind of just deal with however you want. You have a rebellion that would have aided the enemy sweeping toward France again. So we're going to take our second break here. And when we come back, it's really clear now, hopefully, that war is coming. Everything that's gone down as we rolled out of 1798 into 1799 really signifies that war, big war. Yeah, the British have still remained at war, but war on a grander scale was coming for France. We'll talk about how it all triggered and what everybody did and why the Second Coalition had some of the same flaws as the First Coalition. And then we'll set the stage for Napoleon to come back to France from Egypt and seize his moment. We're going to spend the next 2 weeks after this week, next 2 episodes after this week, putting the man in power, especially in our finale. So thank you for hanging out as always. Thank you for the resubs again, Mads, Doc, and everyone else who resubbed tonight. We'll be back in a couple minutes and we'll conclude episode 1.43, which will leave us only 2, as we see the Second Coalition get to work on France in the late 18th century and sets the stage for the fall of the Directory and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. You're welcome to my money. I'll talk to you all in a few minutes. Make sure you stretch your legs, at least stand up, get a drink, do all that stuff, and I'll be back in just a few. Manny, thank you for the resub as I'm going to BRB. We'll be right back.
Shame! 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 Shame!
Now that your muster's over, we are back. Congratulations to the winners. Manny, again, thank you for the resub. Shame on you, Mads, for trying to steal from people. I could actually hear the shame out of my headphones while I was walking around. We're back for the thrilling conclusion and into the quiz of episode 1.43. So, as we said before we went to the break, it was really clear to everybody. You know, France was enacting a draft before 1798 was over. I know you don't feel shame. But France was enacting a draft before the end of 1798, so it's pretty clear to everybody. The Russians really want it. The British want people to help them. The Ottomans need to do it because they need to get Napoleon out of Egypt. The Austrians are, where are the Austrians? But it was pretty clear to most people that war was coming. And the Austrians weren't really eager to get back into war with France. Even though Tsar Paul I was promising... Thank you, Eddie. Even though Tsar Paul I was promising a huge army to help Austria, it was still just all talk at that point. The British were, as always, in this coalition, just only interested in their own interests, primarily the Netherlands. And all anybody could get out of Prussia at this point in time was neutrality. Prussia said, I'm just staying out of it. And that was nice, that Prussia was going to stay out of the yet unofficial Second Coalition, but this Second Coalition wasn't going to be the most stable amalgam of military power on Earth. The Austrians had zero desire to get caught fighting the French alone again, and that's really what had happened, right? Yeah, the British are still at war with France, but they hadn't had ground troops on the continent for several years. Austria was left by themselves to fight the French infantry coming at them. So they didn't want to be the first one to fire at France again. I need like a million, though. So here's Austria going, we don't want to get involved. We don't want to. If we have to be involved, we're certainly not going to do it on our own. We're not going to step out and volunteer in front of the line of all these other nations and maybe accidentally get hung out to dry by them. So that's when the Kingdom of Naples, which I have circled in red on the map, really forced everybody's hand. Because Naples, encouraged by the British, of course, and backed by extravagant promises of support from the Russians, just like Austria, the still independent Kingdom of Naples, which controlled the deep south of Italy, decided that the French position in Italy was weak. They felt that the Neapolitan army, the Naples army, could boot the French out of the French Roman Republic and then roll up the peninsula and just kind of squeeze Italy and push France out like a tube of toothpaste. The Austrians had bluntly told Naples to do nothing to provoke the French without Austrian approval. But Naples just ignored them. And on November the 12th, 1798, the Neapolitans crossed the border with the new Roman Republic. And this attack caught the French general running Rome, a man named Jean-Étienne Championnet, by surprise. And he had to scramble to get his garrison out of the city of Rome before it was trapped there. And Naples' army occupied Rome on November 26th, but this occupation would be extremely short-lived. Championnet regrouped, reinforced his army, and then came storming back into Rome, forcing Naples to run right back out the gate they had just come in. Then Championnet just kept going. Neapolitan toothpaste. Yep, someone got the joke I was laying there. But Championnet just kept going. In short order, he chased the Neapolitan army all the way back to Naples and just blew through whatever part of it had not just run off, and then moved in to occupy Naples. Then further north, the French used this Neapolitan attack as an excuse to reinvade the Piedmont. Now, if you remember from our time with Napoleon, the Piedmont is this area. Some of the best soil on Earth. But They ran into the Piedmont and occupied it. Remember, it had kind of been in a live and let live independent kingdom situation since Napoleon. As long as I'm able to run my troops through your kingdom, you can keep your kingdom. Well, France was done with that. They used Naples as an excuse to reinvade the Piedmont, like all of Italy had conspired against them. And then, in January 1799, General Championnet did a Napoleon. He abolished the Kingdom of Naples and declared it to be the Parthenopean Republic. This was in direct defiance from what is now a standing order from the Directory to all French generals to stop forming any new sister republics. But Championnet thought he was the next Napoleon Bonaparte, and so he went ahead and did it anyway. The establishment of this Parthenopean Republic put Championnet at loggerheads with the Directory's representative, who was dispatched to Naples to supervise the occupation of Naples. The Directory really wanted to break this precedent of, creating new political units and having the army do it without any direction from the government. So, the Directory's representative immediately claimed jurisdiction over all the land and the spoils and the money that the French army was seizing, which is going to pretty much upset all of the troops in the army. Championnet, of course, was having nothing to do with this and expelled that representative out of Naples by force. The Directory, unsure of who was actually to blame for all of this drama between Championnet and this Directory representative, recalled them both to Paris and then quickly decided, obviously, that General Championnet was to blame and then relieved him of his command and court-martialed him. So, hey, look, the Directory learned something. We don't want another Napoleon. These are the steps necessary to prevent another Napoleon. Too bad they didn't learn all the other lessons they should have learned. When it came to their power, the Directory kind of knew what they were doing. When it came to everything else, they were just bumfuzzled. The Directory thought it was time to bring the army to heel. Either that, or be toppled by it by the end of 1799, whichever one comes first. He took his map and crayons away. Exactly, Berlin. The Directory is going to try to bring the army to heel. They're going to try to say, we're in charge here. Now, Napoleon isn't back in France yet. But how do you think that's going to fly when the Directory tries to reassert itself over a Napoleon-led military? We're going to find out. It's not going to go good for the Directory. But aside from this creation of the Parthenopean Republic, the misadventures of the Neapolitans then put enormous pressure on Austria to try, to finally make a decision. Are you going to go back to war with France or not? Because the Russian ambassadors in Vienna were just giving Austria an earful about why did you not go down there and help them? The Russians were now saying, you, Austria, mobilize for war now, or we're not sending our armies. And then, with France clearly now re-aggressive, you're going to face them by yourself. We're not going to help. You go to war now, or there is no coalition that includes Russia. It's a pretty savvy card to play, actually. But then, when Austria says, yep, we just need to mobilize, and Russian troops start entering Habsburg territory, the French found out about it and started to give Vienna an earful, saying, get the Russians out of there. We know what you're up to, or we will declare war. So stuck in the middle, the Austrians finally decided to side with the Russians. The Russians would not be expelled, they told the French ambassadors. Don't tell us what to do in our territory, and if that means war with you, so be it. On the eve of the War of the Second Coalition, the coalition did not have a clear objective, or even similar objectives among all the nations. The Russians were looking to be an ascendant power in Europe, for sure, with their eyes trained on acquiring Greece and maybe Italy too. And this, of course, was going to be unacceptable to all of their partners. The Ottomans did not want them in Greece, because then they're just flanking the Ottoman Empire, which they'd been at war with, for 50 years. The Austrians and British really didn't want them in Italy.
Remember to clonk that follow button,
because that would have given the Russians a massive control point for the Mediterranean Sea, and they didn't want that. Meanwhile, the British wanted the Netherlands back, which has been their goal basically the whole time. They wanted it back badly, but no one else in the coalition really cared about that at all. The only other thing the British wanted was some kind of stable balance of power on the continent, so they could get back to their empire of trade. The Ottomans, meanwhile, just wanted to get the French out of Egypt and get the Russians off their backs. Once the French were expelled from Egypt, who knows if the Turks would remain committed to everything else that was going on. And as for the Austrians, they didn't really know what they wanted. They wanted to roll back the French for sure. They wanted to restabilize their fracturing and soon-to-be-dead Holy Roman Empire. But they didn't have any other really clear-cut objectives beyond push France back, stabilize Holy Roman Empire. That was it. They didn't have any real war aims. The French Directory, meanwhile, was stuck between their ambitions and the reality of the situation. Yeah, they wanted to not fight France alone. That was their other war aim. But the French Directory is stuck between their ambition, what they want to do, and their power, and the reality of what's going on. General Jourdan, now on again, had gone back to the German frontier in November of 1798 to survey the situation, and he wrote back to the councils and to the Directory some pretty pessimistic reports about the state of the army stationed along the Rhine and the Danube. He told them most of the supplies had been diverted to the men that were still camped along the English Channel, or they had gone away with Bonaparte, because it made sense for France to keep a well-provisioned and supplied base of troops along the English Channel should the British decide to invade, because they were the only belligerent, and everything else they had to spare went with Napoleon. So the new reinvigorated frontier along the rivers in Germany basically were not well supplied or garrisoned at all. Jourdan asked the Directory for supplies, reinforcements, guns, shoes, blankets, anything and everything, and he got almost none of it, because the Directory didn't have too much to spare. They had already sent it other places. The levée en masse and all of that production had kind of started to spin down from an industrialization of nation perspective as the war with Austria ceased for a while. And the Directory were also kind of in a bit of a bubble when it came to how absolutely vulnerable they were. The map of Europe showed the Directory controlling a string of sister republics with large armies stationed everywhere. But those large armies were not well provisioned, they were not well supplied, and they were not as large as they were being told, if you remember. It was all on paper, and in reality, Jourdan is absolutely right. If the Austrians and the Russians say, decide to strike at Italy or up into Switzerland, the French are going to have a hell of a time fighting them off. But the Directory was unconcerned with these dour predictions from their general who they had already fired once, and using the Russians crossing the Austrian frontier as a pretext, the Directory reopened hostilities and declared war on March 12, 1799. And this is the beginning of the War of the Second Coalition, which will draw Russia, the Ottoman Empire, Britain, and now Austria into war against France. The only nations that we've really talked about as having significant military presences throughout the entire series who are not at war with France are Spain, who kind of really doesn't have that much of an army, and Prussia, who's sitting there neutral. Everybody else is back in the ball game now. So, in our next episode, episode 1.44, the eve of our season finale, we will begin with a string of French defeats in Italy, Germany, and Switzerland that really threatened to undo everything the French had achieved territorially since 1795. Then we will head back to Paris for yet another political coup. This is the coup that will set up the final coup of Brumaire, which will end the reign of the Directory in our last episode of the season a week later, hopefully, schedule permitting. Of course, we will see Napoleon Bonaparte return home to save France, and maybe while he's at it, seize control of France. And then as we go into season 2, conquer all of Europe. But that is episode 1.43, setting the stage for the downfall of the French Directory and the finality of Napoleon's rise to total power in France. The men who have been in the gold block and the blue block for several weeks on the board of individuals have been there for a reason, because those are the two primary cores of opposition that will go at each other as we roll into these last two episodes. I expect to also do a retrospective during the finale that will lengthen it by a little bit, just to run back through very quickly the major events to jog everyone's memory. Just say, remember this, remember this, remember this, remember this, because this caused this, and this caused this, and this caused this, just so we kind of bring it all to a close. But I'm also going to leave you on a cliffhanger, because the consulate in France is going to be what is Napoleon's first step into absolute power. And the first episode of season 2 is pretty much taking shape in my mind. And that first episode is going to be, what the heck is the consulate? Because I'm not going to form it for you at all this season. We're going to spend our first episodes of season 2 laying groundwork, just like we did in our first few episodes of season 1. So that's where the future is. Again, we will start season 2 sometime in... I have the internet. Yeah, we won't know how I'm presenting it, though. I mean, go look it up if you want. Gilly's been doing that for forever. It's history. Go learn it. But we'll finish, hopefully, here in 2 weeks. Next week, I have to write both episodes next week, by the way. And I'll write the epilogue the week following, because I have to actually go into the office the last week of the season. So I'm going to write, hopefully, both episodes next week. It's going to be a busy week for me. And then we'll pivot to getting those two done before the end of June. I'm going to take a break to kind of clear my head and kind of formulate a conceptual outline past the first few episodes of season 2, do some reading that I need to do, and then probably middle August, I'm looking at a 6-week break, we'll pick up season 2. Gilly is crazy. Gilly is curious, though, and I encourage all of you to read it. I mean, don't just be reliant upon me. I'm well-sourced and I'm well-read, but my interpretation of things, I try to indicate when it's my opinion, but you should all, hopefully, be formulating your own. I've never... heard anyone threaten to learn in retaliation. Yeah, that did just happen. All right, we're going to do a quiz. For those of you that don't know how the quiz works, it is exclamation point answer and then your answer. And don't use the word boy or fix with 2 X's in your answer. You will have a minute once I read the question to provide an answer. Do your best. Give it your level, best try. No jokey answers. And the way the quiz works is whoever's ahead at the end of the season, which only has this quiz and 2 more quizzes after, and maybe a grand finale quiz if I can cook up an idea for it. Maybe the person who's ahead will either get to get something from the store, less than $20 in terms of swag, or they can ask me to donate that money to Ukrainian Red Cross. But the quiz is my way of finding out if I did my job, if I, conveyed the point here well enough and taught you something, and hopefully I did, or if I missed something, it's an opportunity for me to re-explain it. So please participate. It helps me out tremendously in the way I approach this series, and hopefully it's fun for you guys. No jokey answers, aka the Berlin Clause. That is correct. That is why I mention that every week. So without further ado, we will get to the first question of the night. Here we go. Our first question of 10 this evening is this. What was the major point of contention at the Second Congress of Rastatt that actually flipped some members of the Holy Roman Empire onto the French negotiating side? One minute. As always, I really appreciate you guys hanging out, the subs, helping me with the tier 2, tier 3 to pay for the maps. The maps run me probably about $10-15 a week when I pull up more than one from the map archive. So it's really appreciated when you guys help me offset that, because they do a much better job than I do. But what was the major point of contention at the Second Congress of Rastatt that actually flipped some members of the Holy Roman Empire onto the French negotiating side? You have 25 seconds. And I understand there's a little bit of a delay tonight, so finish your answers. I'll probably be pretty lenient. Rocket is in. No Gilly tonight. So it's either the Rocket Show or you guys get involved. Mads made a charge last week. Now sitting at 30. Berlin's at 25. Berlin is in as well with 3 seconds left. And here we go. What was the major point of contention at the Second Congress of Rastatt that got those princes I didn't mention them by name, but part of the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, Mads cheated. Yeah, she used the cards, but that's why they're there. I did test the cards for the show tonight. But why did some of the members of the Holy Roman Empire kind of side with the French? It was because it was those Western Rhine princes. They wanted ecclesiastical land east of the Rhine, and they figured that the French were going to be their best bet to get that as compensation for giving up their homes effectively. So, the first answer comes to us from the German princes wanted church land in place of their lost lands. That is correct. Rocket gets it. And I need to spell my command right. There we go. Got it. Rocket. Berlin answered as well. Angry about losing land and many nobles who had no power in siding with France was their best choice. Correct. Those are correct statements. The big thing was they thought that France would be their best bet in getting church land. But that is correct. Nothing wrong said in that statement. So there you go. Berlin have another point to 26. Rocket to 51. We'll go into question 2. What was the single biggest factor in the resurgence of Austrian confidence in the summer of 1798? In the summer of 1798. Rocket is in. You have 35 seconds left. Berlin is in. "18 seconds left. The single biggest factor in the resurgence of Austrian confidence in the summer of 1798. Berlin and Rocket, the only people to answer. Time is up. The answer first from Rocket. Napoleon leaving France to go to Egypt. Absolutely the correct answer. The only man who had been able to beat them convincingly all the time was gone. Berlin, what did you say? Destruction of the French Navy. I will take that as yes, the Battle of the Nile did conclude in the summertime. But it wasn't the thing. It was the next domino that fell. But yes, I will take either one of those answers. The next question, as we go over to Ireland. Who were the two factions of Irish patriots that worked with and against each other at times during the uprisings of 1798? I did tack it on in chat. That don't count. Of course, at the question phase, I buffer like crazy. Thanks for chat questions. Sorry, Rocket. I'll read it out loud again for you. And I mean, if you come in after the buzzer, that's okay. Who were the two factions of Irish patriots that worked with and against each other at times during the uprisings of 1798? Mads redeemed two heads with Berlin. So if Berlin gets this right, Mads also gets a point. Mads does not like that Berlin is 3 points away from her, apparently. Berlin and Rocket are in with 10 seconds left. The two factions of Irish patriots that worked with and against each other at times during the uprisings of 1798. Manny barely beats the buzzer. I object to Mads and her evil cards. You don't make the rules because it's for a good cause. The first answer comes from Rocket, I believe. The Protestants and the Catholics. That is correct.
Well, it's about tree fitting.
Rocket gets it correct. Berlin says Catholics and Protestants. So that's correct. He gets it, and so does Mads. Manny, what does he say? The Catholics and Protestants. Okay, CF. Still want that real rules command. Manny grabs a point. taking him to 3 on the season. The next question is, why did no one rally to the Irish-French banner after their victory at Castlebar? I'm here to play my favorite songs for you, not to play your favorite songs for me. That is the real rules of CF's channel. Why did no one rally to the Irish-French banner after their victory at Castlebar? 30 seconds. Berlin is in with 25 seconds. Rocket right behind him. Mads also gets in with 10 seconds left. Time is up. The first answer, I believe Berlin's first here. The French were late and the Irish didn't want to follow in the wake of the rebellion that was just put down. That is exactly the answer. Good job, Berlin. Berlin closes to within 2 of Mads in 3rd. I think Rocket was next. The Irish rebellions had already been basically squashed and they wanted no part in it anymore. Correct. Hopefully Kays remembers this time where I educated people on Irish history. It was important to the larger narrative, but I went into significant depth on it. Mads. The church forbade it. That is not correct. The next question. What was the single event that allowed the Ottomans and the Russians to put aside decades of hostility to face France as allies? I drew him nice circles on the map of Ireland. I did that too, explaining where things were. What was the single event that allowed the Ottomans and Russians to put aside decades of hostility to face France as allies? Seven seconds left. Berlin is in. Rocket is in. Mads is in. Let's see what you guys said. Rocket. Napoleon's invasion of Egypt that disrupted grain trade with Istanbul. No, that was the thing that upset the Ottomans. But remember, they looked at that and said, what can we do? How do we get that back? What was the thing that allowed them to finally feel confident enough to do something about it? It was not that, but it was the defeat of the fleet at the Nile. That was the catalyzing thing for the Ottomans and the Russians to say, okay, the French fleet's not there anymore. We can go do something about this now. And that's why they let them sail through the Bosphorus and then through the Dardanelles. Napoleon going to Egypt and subsequent loss of the French Navy that left his army stranded on foreign soil. That is the complete answer. Yes. Mads. The formation of the Second Coalition. Nope. Next question. This one should be an easy one. What changed Russia's overall foreign policy stance toward France from potential threat to must be defeated? Wow, I'm looking around at who streams under the history tag. I am legitimately the only person doing anything that is not like old commercials and stuff. It's pretty funny. Interesting. People streaming Total War under history. 20 seconds left. What changed Russia's overall foreign policy stance toward France from potential threat to must be defeated? Yeah, apparently they are, Rocket, on Twitch. Uh-oh, Mad said, team up with Berlin again. Time is up. The first answer, Arky will take it. Napoleon's victory against Austria. No. It was the death of Catherine the Great. Remember, she had not engaged unless Russia's vital interests were at stake, but always pushed everybody else to go do stuff for her while she targeted Turkey and Greece. When Paul I became Tsar, he was like, let's go fight France now. There was an overnight change in their foreign policy. Berlin. Catherine the Great's death and Napoleon's taking of Malta. Those two things, but the Catherine the Great death was the big thing. The invasion of Malta, the capture of Malta, was effectively the declaration of war. And Mads also gets that point. What did Manny say? Stop complaining. The next answer. That is the end. I know Arky's got one in there. The death of Catherine the Great. Correct. Arky takes his 8th point of the season. The next question, make sure there's no more in there. I did that to Berlin last week. Nope, that's it. The next question. What was the major benefit of the Jourdan Law? Not so much for Republican Revolutionary France, but for the coming French Empire. .30 seconds left. What was the major benefit of the Jourdan Law? Not so much for Republican Revolutionary France, but for the coming French Empire. Rocket is in with 23 seconds left. Berlin is in. Manny is in. Thank you all for participating tonight. 10 seconds left. Mads is in. We have 1, 2, 3 questions left after this one. And time is up. First answer, I believe, comes from Rocket. Veteran soldiers that were ready-made to fight. Yes, the professionalization of the... That's a hard word to type, by the way. The professionalization of the French army was the major impact moving into the Empire period. Yes, it created soldiers that were ready to fight, that were hardened, that didn't leave after a campaign. They made the military their career. That is absolutely correct. And assuming I don't fat finger buttons on my keyboard and can type, there we go. Rocket gets a point. Takes her to 55, 12 behind Gilly. The next question. Or the answer, Berlin. It set the stage for the transition from patriotic one-time war soldiers to hardened career soldiers. That is correct. Professionalization. Yes, yes it is. You do whatever you want to do with your buttons, buddy. The next answer comes from Manny, I believe. Every Frenchman is a soldier and must defend the country. No, that was already kind of the thing with the levy en masse, but you have to remember that the campaign against Austria was over, and those men had kind of been released back. As the war turns into its new phase in the Second Coalition, and Napoleon inherits this as the overall leader of France, these armies aren't going home anymore. They're not going home and softening back up or anything. They're going to be professional, standing pretty much for his reign armies. That's also going to breed them to be extremely loyal to him. Insanely loyal to him, as it will turn out. The next answer, if there is one, Maz, the volunteer army. The benefit was a volunteer army. Not enough, Mads. Because there were volunteers in the army beforehand. That is the end. Anybody else after the buzzer? No. Let's go to the 8th question of the night. What two mistakes from the Vendée did the French repeat in Belgium as the War of the Second Coalition loomed? What two mistakes from the Vendée did the French repeat in Belgium as the War of the Second Coalition loomed? You have 20 seconds. Ten seconds. Time is up. No one answered.
That follow button.
Anybody still typing? I'll give it 10 more seconds before I give you the answer. What two mistakes from the Vendée? I know one but not the other. Berlin gets an answer in. I'm going to talk for another 5 seconds. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Berlin with the only answer. My answer is two things they shouldn't have done. Conscripted people to come fight their war right after those people, second thing, had demolished their tradition, their church, everything that they were comfortable and familiar with. Those are the two things they did in the Vendée. They did it again in Belgium. As the Berlin, let's see, demanding money and supplies and changing policy after taking over a nation, then expecting them to be happy about giving you soldiers and fighting for you in other wars. Basically, that's it. Changing policy is what I'm going to go with. Demanding money and supplies, yes. It's more the church thing. Yeah, to demolish the church part is the thing. But that's on the gist of it, Berlin. I will give you the point. The next and 9th question of the night is this. What action triggered the dominoes that kicked off the War of the Second Coalition in earnest? What thing happened that caused everybody else to start putting pressure on everybody else? "30 seconds. Rocket is in. "25 seconds. What action triggered the dominoes that kicked off the War of the Second Coalition in earnest? Berlin is in. Time is up. Rocket, what do you say? The invasion of Malta. No. The invasion of Malta is what pissed off Tsar Paul I, but it's not the thing that got everybody chattering at each other. The thing that got everybody chattering at each other was the Neapolitan invasion of the French Roman Republic. That is in turn what got Russia saying, hey, Austria, why aren't you doing something down there? If you want our troops to come in here and help with this whole thing that's about to go down, you'll declare war now. And then they said, okay, bring in the troops, we're ready to go. And France said, oh, wait, what are you doing with those Russian troops here? Get them out of there, we're declaring war now. And it put Austria in the middle of a rock and a hard place. That's the event, the Neapolitan invasion of the Roman Republic. The answer from Berlin, Naples attacking the French. That is correct. The last question, I don't think anyone else answered that one, right? Nobody else? Nope. Okay, the last question of the night. What problem which plagued the allies of the Second Coalition was similar to the problem that the First Coalition faced? What problem which plagued the allies of the Second Coalition was similar to the problem that the First Coalition faced? 25 seconds. Berlin is in. Rocket is in. As we wind down episode 1.43 and leave 2 episodes for Fix to Right this week, or at least get 1.5 of them done. The answer from, I believe Rocket was first. They had no solitary goal or objective. They were scattered and each wanted different things or didn't know what they wanted at all. Yes, none of them shared the same war aims. That is correct. The exact same problem that the Prussians, Austrians, and British ran into in the first coalition. That is absolutely correct, Rocket. So I should type intent, Rocket. There we go. Berlin's answer to round out the night. Actually, that was Berlin's answer, wasn't it? Yep. The cohesion of purpose in fighting the war, what they all wanted. Yeah, you both got the same answer. That's good. I'll just give Berlin your point. I saw yours go into chat on this side first. That's why I thought you were first. I didn't look at the name. But you both got it right. There was no unified war aim. They didn't all get down next to a table and say, this is what we all need to focus on as our combined joint effort of coalition. They weren't really a coalition, even though they're called that. They were individual parties kind of backing each other, trying to get their own stuff done at France's and maybe each other's expense. That was the issue. Nice trade. Yes, you both got the point. We'll go back over to the main screen. Thank you all for participating in the quiz tonight. I don't see anybody to raid out there. So if anyone has a suggestion, now is the time to speak up. But thank you all for being a part of the show as always and for answering in the quiz. It helps me determine if I need to be a little bit clearer on some points. Rocket says, nope. I don't have anybody I'm following. Have a good night, everybody, says Arky. I think that's where we're going to leave it because no one under the history or educational tags are doing anything history or educational right now. Back to back 10 out of 10, indeed. All right, then we're going to get out of here. Thank you all for participating. We'll be back, hopefully, next Saturday. It should happen. I'm at home still next week. I'm going to do a lot of writing next week to bring this whole thing down in the last 2 episodes. We'll be back hopefully next Saturday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the live episode interactive recording on Twitch. And then as soon as is possible after that episode is done, as we do every week, we'll post it on YouTube. If you want to catch up, exclamation point YouTube in my Twitch chat gets done or check the panels below. We're out of here. You guys have a good rest of your weekend. Don't forget, follow my good friend on Dustin. Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. He's playing Resident Evil 6 now. I'm not sure he's going to play that on Monday, though. He'll post the schedule on our Discord. Then Permanoob, he is not streaming next week. He'll be in The Stars at Night Are Big and Bright deep down in the heart of Texas, but he's been playing some Minecraft lately. Thanks, Terry Gilly. I think he's also out part of this week. He was playing Bloodborne. I think he's going to make that his off game, or his alternate game. When he does get back. And then there's Intent Rocket, who still streams whenever the hell she wants to. She was playing Immortal Phoenix Rising. It feels like the juice is running out of that in terms of content that's left for her. So we'll see what she's going to turn into next. Make sure you follow the Big Top Outlaws on Twitter to catch all of these people. And then my friend CF Live did the music for parts of this show, our BRB music. He's a great guy. Monday, not so much, but Wednesday, Fridays on his channel. And then Mr. Landiggity plays games and also helps with some of our music. He's a great guy. Go give him a follow as well. We're out of here. You guys have a great rest of the weekend. I'll talk to you all later, and thank you so much for all the support.
My lord, yourself.
Excellent to each other.